Welcome, everyone. As we get started here, we'll just be admitting people in from the waiting rooms. We'll just give it a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just admitting a few people in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started in just a couple minutes. If you are not speaking today, would you please make sure to mute yourself? I heard someone say, "Oh no," under their breath. So hopefully you're now muted and that whatever you're saying "oh no" to is okay. Okay, so in the interest of time, thank you to everyone who has hopped on. Just so everyone knows, this event is being recorded. And so if you don't want your face to be on a recorded event that will be shared, please make sure to turn off your camera. But everyone else, we'd love to see your face. Really excited. This is the first virtual early reception with the Women's Foundation that we have ever put on. So we're really excited to see all the people showing up and people continuing to join us. I am going to turn it over to our interpreter for the day, and she is going to give us some instructions on how to select your preferred language, because we are offering this event with simultaneous English and Spanish interpretation. And so I'm going to pass it over to Andrea, and then I'll do some housekeeping and give everyone an overview of the event this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me right now? Okay. Este mensaje lo voy a repetir en español. My name is Andrea Saiko, and I am here with the Community Language Cooperative because the hosts of this meeting have committed to language justice. This means that everybody will be able to speak and hear in the language of their heart. And to do that, we're going to offer simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. And in a couple of seconds, we're going to turn on that feature, and you will see on the bottom of your screen a world map or 3 dots or what it says more, and then you will be able to choose your language. If your main language is English, please choose the English channel so that you can hear everybody. If you are fully bilingual, you don't need to choose a channel. And if you have any question, please ask it in the chat. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Andrea Saiko y estoy aquí con la Community Language Cooperative porque los anfitriones de esta reunión se han comprometido a la justicia del lenguaje. Esto significa que las personas pueden hablar y escuchar en el idioma de su corazón. Para hacer eso vamos a ofrecer interpretación simultánea en inglés y en español, y en algunos segundos vas a ver un mapa mundo en la parte de abajo de tu pantalla, o si estás en una tableta o en un iPhone, vas a ver 3 punticos donde dice More. Por favor, escoge tu idioma preferido. Si tu idioma es el español, escoge el idioma español. Si tú eres totalmente bilingüe, no tienes que escoger ningún idioma. Y si tienes alguna pregunta, por favor, hazla en el chat. Voy a aprender la interpretación now. I will select, okay, in the interpretation now.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, so there is the little world map at the bottom, and as Andrea said, you click on that to choose your language. If you click off, that means it will share in English and in Spanish. So if you want to have just one language, choose your language, the language of your heart. I love that. So again, welcome everyone. Oh yeah, Can everybody hear in their language? Thank you, Andrea. Okay, so for those of you that I haven't met, my name is Madison Golden, and I am the Women Give Director at United Way of Larimer County. And Women Give is a program that provides childcare scholarships to single mothers that are pursuing higher education. So that means they go pursue their degree and we cover the tab for their childcare expenses. When Women Give started 15 years ago, the high cost of childcare was identified as a major barrier to single mothers returning to school. And so that's how Women Give was born 15 years ago. And we are so happy and thrilled and impressed with the philanthropic heart of our community. We have over 500 Women Give members that donate to our program. And this semester alone, we are supporting 27 women and 33 children pursue their higher education and also have access to high quality care. And this year alone, we'll be awarding over $250,000 in childcare scholarships. So thank you to everyone who has supported our program. And also many of you on this call also serve many of our families, our Women Give Scholarship recipients. And I'm remembering just now to slow down so that Andrea can translate for us or interpret for us. So when Women Give started in 2006, we knew that the local level and local engagement.
Maddie, you hit mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay. What was the last thing you heard?
Local engagement.
Awesome, thank you. Local engagement was really important and wanted to provide that direct service to single mothers in our community. With that, we also recognized that system level change at the state level was imperative to achieving economic mobility for women in our community and in our state. And so since the inception of Women Give, we have partnered with the Women's Foundation of Colorado as our public policy and advocacy partner, essentially. So we give an annual gift to the Women's Foundation specifically for that, to support public policy and advocacy efforts that impact families in Larimer County, but also statewide. And are really so grateful for that partnership. They do work that we can't do as a two-person Women Give staff. So we are so grateful for all the amazing work the Women's Foundation is doing at the state level to support families in our community and then also across Colorado. So with that, I will give you a brief overview of what to expect for the rest of this afternoon. We are going to hear special remarks from Lauren Y. Castile of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. Following that, we will hear a presentation from Christina Taylor on the state of early care and education sector. And after that, Deirdre Sullivan, our very own president and CEO of United Way of Larimer County, will be moderating a panel of experts from across Larimer County. And those include Ann Hutchison, president and CEO of the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce, Casey Hedrick, who is the executive director of Boys and Girls Clubs of Larimer County, Gloria Catt is the executive director of the Family Center, La Familia. Jason Damweber is the assistant town administrator for the town of Estes Park. Queen X is representing New Eyes Village and Queen's Legacy Foundation. And Christina Taylor will also be serving on our panel. She's the executive director of the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County. Just checking to make sure I didn't miss anyone. And so everyone knows, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And if there's anything specific that you would like me to respond to, please feel free to send a private message. There will be time for questions and answers after the panel. But if there is anything pressing or you just want to get it out of your head, put it in the chat and we will respond to questions. And then also, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please keep yourself muted. And I do have mute power, so if you are unmuted, I may mute you. But if you're speaking, I won't do that. So don't worry, I'm not going to cut you off. And I think, one last thing, since not everyone here knows each other, we would love for everyone to put in the chat your name and if you're representing an organization and what brought you here today. So with that, I will pass it over to Lauren Y. Castile, President and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. And thanks again to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Maddie. You may notice that Maddie and I are kind of smiling to each other every time she says my name. She has been well indoctrinated to the use of my middle name. So she calls me Lauren Y or Lauren Y Castile all the time. It is such a pleasure to see all of you. Thank you for joining us on this afternoon. I'm aware of the fact days are becoming a little bit longer, which is kind of exciting. The light is shifting coming into my office here at home. I also want to thank Deidre and all of the panelists, all of the Women Give members, United Way of Larimer County, the Chamber for your participation. And if any of you, I believe, who are on this call are also scholarship recipients, congratulations to you for your journey, and especially during these times. If you're receiving childcare scholarships, it probably means that you are also navigating in a variety of ways, from home, school, education, kids, all of the above. And I want you to know that we see you and we recognize all of the challenges that can be involved with that as well. I am the mother of 3 and the grandmother of 4. So I assure you that I have been there at some point in my life. I'd like to begin, before I give you a quick update about the Women's Foundation and some acknowledgement of the importance as well of ECE in this COVID environment, as I just mentioned, and in Colorado's overarching economy. But many of you know that I like to begin with the words of someone else who might be more powerful and more interesting or more important than anything that I have to say. So today I'm actually quoting Marie Curie, Madame Marie Curie. I was taught that the way of progress is neither swift nor easy. Some of our goals are easily attained. Others demand stamina and resourcefulness. And still others require a commitment of long standing. We can only be sure of our effort. However, we can be assured that honest effort will allow us to make measurable progress. And I chose to share that today as the long day's journey of the night of COVID in the months and the days and the years and however long this time has been. It's difficult to kind of keep track anymore, but I want you to know that each of you as individuals, certainly, as I mentioned earlier, those of you who are navigating childcare in these times, you are making progress. And sometimes it's really hard, but all of the organizations and all of us together will continue to make progress together. So our relationship, as Maddie mentioned, with Women Give has been longstanding, and we are deeply appreciative of it. You were among the first to recognize that public policy helps us to reach all 2.8 million people, women, female identifying people in the state of Colorado through public policy. Direct service programs, as you mentioned earlier, there are a number of women, 33 children, but through public policy and our advocacy at the state legislature, we can impact everyone. Allison may have already put into the chat, I'm not sure, but we will put in our public policy page so that you can see our advocacy tools, as well as information about the 2020 session and our priorities and a number of our successes as well during that legislative session. We're just now beginning to go into the 2021 legislative session. Last year, Women Give crossed over $500,000 in support to the Women's Foundation of Colorado. Woo, thank you, thank you. Snap it out, do whatever you need to do to share appreciation to Women Give for that. With a $50,000 gift last year, we'll be at $550,000 in support of public policy, advocacy, and research. You might wonder why research is important. Our research this year was invaluable. We were able to roll out a research paper about what would happen if you failed to invest in women. And we began with the baseline on the economic status of women. And we were able to have both a perspective of COVID as well as racial equity and their impacts on women in the state of Colorado. So it's relevant and essential and is being used by legislators, nonprofit organizations, other foundations to guide their work. Similarly, our COVID relief funds, we gave 108 grants to 108 organizations in 64 counties through our Women and Families of Colorado Relief Fund. And we also did a report on how the COVID pandemic impacted women from a really bird's eye view of the kinds of needs that we funded. And as you might imagine, that included food, it included housing, it included cash stipends and supplements, transportation, perhaps for those who were working on the front lines. So again, Women Give, your support helped us to stay relevant and relentless in our work. Similarly, the support of Women Give for the Northern Colorado community through your scholarships and understand the importance of systemic change cannot be underestimated. And your support for the Women's Foundation of Colorado is just one small example of that, as important as it is to us. We're also really grateful that many Northern Colorado leaders are involved with both the Women's Foundation of Colorado and Women Give, and have had the foresight to support us in terms of our direct action on the ground, as well as our systemic change at the legislature. Partnership is everything in these times. You've seen neighbors helping neighbors and communities reaching out to each other. That's what happens between Women Give and the Women's Foundation of Colorado. We are neighbors who are helping neighbors, and we're doing that statewide. So how can you become engaged? Well, I've mentioned policy and advocacy in different ways a couple of times. We have Advocating for Impact virtual trainings that are going to be starting on February 17th and continuing through June. And if I know Allison, she's ahead of me, she's putting the link in the chat so you can learn more about how you might participate in that as well. These will be dynamic trainings that will go on monthly through the month of June, starting on February 17th. Those will cultivate community involvement in equitable systems by creating a free and accessible resource, as well as an inclusive environment. Let's be honest, we have seen some of the worst of what can happen even in the most viable democratic society. What's really important is that we give people the tools that they need to build community and a healthy, strong democracy and peaceful discourse. We're not asking everyone to agree, but we are asking them to understand the procedures that are necessary for us to be able to hear each other in a meaningful way and to advocate within our individual communities and statewide. I know I speak for all of you if you're on the call today, that my heart broke on January 6th. But we will begin to build a new cadre of voice and
Un
power.
nuevo grupo de voces y de poder a medida que vamos avanzando en este estado de Colorado para asegurarnos de que los problemas que son importantes para las mujeres y que están
They are issues that affect us all. Paid family medical leave is just one example. And then we'll also give the participants confidence or help them to discover and elevate and to help their existing confidence shine. We don't empower others. You all already have the power. We're just giving you new tools to use it. And then last but not least, we are really proud of the Women and Girls of Color Fund that was just launched. Currently, we have grant applications for what we're calling rural Colorado, and it includes part of, I believe, Weld County, Allison, and Larimer, but you have to check the website. We're going to have 2 rounds of grant making. One is we're calling rural, the other Front Range, but we did it by zip code and demographics. So go to the website that Allison just put in to see if you're eligible right now to apply for the Women and Girls of Color Fund. You might ask, why do we have a fund that is specifically targeted for women and girls of color? You can have universal goals, and we have that all women and girls in Colorado, regardless of background and identity, will prosper. And as we cultivate community, I talked about research a little bit ago. Ms. Foundation released a powerful report called Pocket Change. And through that report, we learned that 0.005% of funding nationally goes to women and girls of color. As you can probably recognize, you can't have gender equity without racial equity. If in fact we can ensure that everyone has access to economic power and that we support the leadership of women of color in nonprofit organizations, then ultimately we all benefit. Racism is in fact a deterrent to economic growth for everyone. So we're excited. We have received funding from the Colorado Health Foundation. We have a matching grant from the Ford Foundation. So your $5, $10, $100 will double up and go extra far. So again, that link is in the chat. And we have members of the Larimer County community who are part of our advisory council. Ajanet Moosbar, I was looking, I don't know if Ajanet is joining us today, and Corey Wong are both representing your community. Corey was a part of the framing process that helped us to develop the fund, and she and Ajanet are now a part of the ongoing advisory council, which is going to be its own leadership development group. So Northern Colorado Committee and other statewide opportunities for you to engage a dedicated group of volunteers here on the screen before me today and community members. And I know that we are going to have a very exciting and dynamic panel lifting up issues that are specific to you and actions that are being taken within your community by those members that you know and respect and trust. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lauren Y. We really appreciate your words. Whenever I am speaking, I try to channel you because I love your charisma and energy, and really appreciate you sharing on behalf of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. And want to encourage everyone, feel free to use the reactions if you want to put up a heart or let's see, some confetti, or a thumbs up or clapping. Please feel free to do that throughout the presentation. And now I'm going to pass it off to Christina Taylor, Executive Director of the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County.
Thanks, Maddie. Good evening, everyone, and thanks to United Way and Women Give for asking me to be here to speak tonight on the state of the early care and education sector, or ECE, as I will say several times in this presentation. I'm honored to be here. So a little bit about us. The Early Childhood Council of Larimer County exists to support the systems that impact children in our community. This includes ongoing support of quality early education, like coaching for early educators and childcare programs, quality improvement grants to programs, and ongoing professional development opportunities for educators to advance their career. We also provide scholarships for students interested in becoming a licensed early educator. This past year, the support needs of the early care and education sector have taken on new forms. Early in the pandemic, when confusion was high around where infections were worst, what the risk factors were, and how one should avoid infection, early educators were overwhelmed and terrified. K through 12 teachers were told it was unsafe for them to be in the classroom, but early educators were asked to continue providing care and education for families. And hundreds of programs in Larimer County did just that. So they kept their doors open and kept allowing families into their homes and centers, even as the pandemic ramped up. Early educators are obviously not immune to infection, and we've heard story after story from our ECE community of educators, spouses, and children getting sick, and of the growing fear. Next was supplies. Supplies started running out. Providers were struggling to find basic protective equipment and cleaning supplies to ensure they were keeping their homes and centers clean and safe. To add to that, families began pulling their children from care and keeping them home out of fear of infection. So revenue in the early care and education sector tanked, and providers continued to struggle to keep their doors open even today. ECE operates on a razor-thin margin as it is. Providers rely on families' tuition to keep their doors open, and have operated in a space of waiting lists and no openings for years due to the ongoing shortage of licensed early educators. The pandemic flipped that model on its head, and early educators continue to pay the price. So among a sample of more than 40 family childcare providers to whom we provided grant funding from United Way, reported lost revenue between August and December, so just those few months, was more than $200,000, which is a 51% drop in revenue in the same period from the prior year. There are more than 100 family providers in Larimer County and more than 200 centers. So the estimated millions in revenue lost over this past year for a struggling sector is staggering. So the Early Childhood Council stepped in to provide supports in as many ways as we could, including peer support to help early educators get through the fear of their day-to-day. We did supply drives that included hundreds of thousands of dollars in diapers and formula and bleach, soap, gloves, masks, toilet paper, you name it, and grants to early educators to support their ability to stay open and serve families. We relied on partnerships like that with United Way, the Community Foundation and the Women's Foundation, local nonprofits, Larimer County and state government to get as many resources to early education or early educators as possible. We also launched a free online portal for families to access real-time information on available childcare and early education spots in Larimer County called Larimer Childcare Connect. You can find that portal at larimerchildcare.org. And we encourage you to share that with families you know. If someone wants to be kind enough to throw that into the chat, I'd be grateful. It's an excellent portal for families to find real-time access to care, which is something we lacked deeply and was very necessary during the pandemic and beyond. So what I'm missing here is why early educators were in this boat to begin with. Early care and education, often referred to as childcare, is an undervalued and underappreciated sector. Early educators are sometimes looked down upon as glorified babysitters. The salary range for an early childhood teacher at a center, for example, remains far below the self-sufficiency standard in Larimer County, despite the education and licensure requirements attached to that role. According to the Economic Policy Institute, more than 15% of early educators in Colorado live in poverty, as well or well above the 2.4% of K through 12 teachers that do. But this is a double-edged sword. So if ECE centers were to increase salaries, the costs would then be passed on to families. And as we know, early care and education is still unaffordable to most families. The Federal Department of Human Services released a study a few years ago to establish the level at which a family can reasonably afford childcare and early education expenses, among other financial commitments. They landed on a 7% on 7% of a family's gross income. The average family in Colorado spends 20.5% of their income on childcare, 20.5% of their income. And single parents can spend more than 60% of their income on childcare costs. So obviously this is unsustainable for both families and early educators. I want to highlight that early educators should be celebrated, both for their role over the past year in ensuring our country was able to keep essential businesses open, but also for the tremendous value that they add to our society and to our economy. So early education is essential for COVID recovery to ensure our economy is able to rebound and that families, especially mothers, can return to the workforce and help us rebuild. In addition to that, children who have affordable quality childcare and early education are more likely to have higher educational attainment and grow into stable adults with successful careers, which results in increasing earning and spending potential in our local economy. When children who have quality early experiences grow up, they are less likely to be unemployed, less likely to commit crimes, and less likely to have substance use issues. The National Forum on Early Childhood Policy and Programs has found that for every dollar invested in quality early education, it can yield a $4 to $9 return. It's now more clear than ever how much childcare and early education impact us all. They impact our ability to work and provide for our families, and they also impact children and their future trajectory. Well, that sounds pretty dire, and what can we do, right? A lot needs to change to alleviate the issues that I've just discussed. Significant public investment will be our best bet to revamp this failed market, to ensure that early educators are valued and paid a competitive wage, and that families can access needed childcare and early education. Aside from public investment, there are other ways for us to make headway. So we at the Early Childhood Council launched a public information campaign last month that aims to help, hold on, I'm going to drop all the links in the chat, that aims to elevate the early care and education sector in the eyes of the public, and to highlight the immense importance of early education on a large variety of societal and economic outcomes. But we need your help, people like you, to get the word out. So public information campaigns rely on the word of mouth and social media to get the message to every corner of our community. So I dropped all those links into the chat and highly encourage you to spread the word. A positive shift in the public perception of the early education field can support opportunities to increase public investment in the future. And it also, positive perception of the field will also support our ability to attract and retain quality educators, as they're more likely to feel valued in the profession if they are elevated to educators in the eyes of the public. Private and philanthropic investment in early education is also really important and helps us to establish clear data on the true cost of quality early education. So partners like United Way and Women Give are instrumental in raising funds to support families' access to childcare and early education and constitute a needed short-term solution to this issue. Additionally, employers can look within their own organization for solutions to support their employees' access to early education, including policy changes that allow flexible schedules and remote work, even after the pandemic subsides, and benefits packages that include childcare and early education. And then lastly, I know Lauren touched on this a little bit, but advocacy at the local, state, and federal level for increased investment in early childhood and for streamlined pathways and financial support for early educators to enter the field are also incredibly important. The Colorado Children's Campaign does a phenomenal job each year of outlining the legislative agenda in Colorado and at the federal level, and in highlighting the policies and budget requests will have a positive impact. And phone calls to policymakers and promotion of early childhood friendly policies in your social and professional networks can go a long way in catalyzing positive change. So I encourage each of you to become engaged in the public information campaign and to tell the story of the value of early childhood education, to talk about the challenges we faced in Larimer County around childcare, and to persuade your friends and colleagues to take a role alongside you to change the current scenario to one of hope and sustainability for a thriving early care and education sector for our children. Please do follow all of those social media links that I posted in the chat, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Christina. So appreciate your perspective and viewpoint. I'm Deirdre Sullivan, for those of you who don't know me or logged in, and I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Larimer County, and delighted to be here among all of you. So thrilled to have the Women's Foundation of Colorado team here with us, the Women Give members, and all of you. I think my former role in our community, I had the opportunity to have a visual image of what we're talking about today. In seeing a parent entering an early care and education center with a name badge on representing a local employer, or a uniform for a local restaurant, holding the hand of a toddler, running to their teacher saying, "Hi, Miss Maria. Hi, Miss Maria. I'm so glad to be here," and being embraced by a caring, loving, and well-trained adult. And that visual image to me is really an inspiration for the work that we have among us. And I'm delighted to have a panel today of people I have had the honor to work alongside in 27 years here, who really represent a lot of perspectives and sectors that to come together to be part of the solution as we come out of COVID. And, you know, this issue, as Christina mentioned, was one that existed long before the pandemic. And we've now seen a different element of need to address. So I won't go on and on because I think the folks that we have here with us have a lot to offer in terms of solution. And I heard once the best way to really get a united entity of people working together on something is to ask them to all sit on a public panel together and then move forward with some rolling up our sleeves. So we have the wonderful honor tonight to hear from Ann Hutchison with the Fort Collins Area Chamber, who I have known for almost 20 years in our work together. Jason Damweber from the town of Estes Park, Gloria Catt from the Family Center La Familia, Casey Hedrick from the Boys and Girls Club of Larimer County, Queen X from Queen's Legacy Foundation and New Eyes Village, and Christina, who's offered to sit on the panel and really represent more than what she talked about in her opening, the social emotional needs of young children that we've seen both pre and post or during pandemic, and how the role of early care and education in that space. One of the things that I am excited about having represented here tonight is we have long known that this is that early care and education is good for children. It's good for their growth and development. But I think in the last 5 years or so, we've really recognized the critical role that this plays on communities' economic health. And that's why our tonight's topic was really, weaving economic health, family health, and community resilience together. So without anything further, I will just have our panelists introduce themselves, and we've asked them just to open us up with a high-level overview of the intersection of their world as they wear their professional hats or personal hats, because many of them are also parents themselves or grandparents, and just how they've seen the intersection with the role of early care and education. So I'm just going to go in the order I see you all on my screen and call on Ann to kick us off.
Thanks, Deirdre. So happy to be a part of this panel today and to share some perspectives. The Fort Collins Area Chamber has long held the value that childcare is a social issue, but more importantly, it is an economic issue. And we've been working in that space for the last several years, mostly alongside these experts that are joining us today on the panel and so thoughtfully are driving the conversation. My job is to simply bring business to the table so that we can really find community solutions. And that's really the role of the chamber in our community. Our goal is to empower business to build community so they can be very proud of the place that they live and work and also then have economic success. The side note would be, since pandemic, our work as a chamber has really pivoted very strongly to this space of response, reopening and recovering. And certainly we are very anxious about the long-term economic impact on not only our childcare providers, but on our youth, on our parents. And it's a key part of this Reignite conversation that we are starting to have with economic developers across the area. How do we recover, and what's the systemic problem with our childcare system, and how do we fix it in order to bring as many people into our economy as possible?
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate it. I'm going to move to Jason.
Hi, everyone. Jason Danweber. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator with the Town of Estes Park. I've been with the town for about a year now. Before Colorado, I was actually in Washington, D.C., where my two little ones were participants in the universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, which was just wonderful. So when we moved out here, it was really surprising to learn that all-day kindergarten is actually a new thing in Colorado, let alone pre-K for everyone. Anyways, in my capacity as Assistant Town Administrator, I oversee IT, risk management, the museum, and special projects and initiatives, including the town's initiatives focused on workforce housing and childcare. So I'll leave it at that for now if we're just doing introductions, but I'll have a lot to say later.
Great, thanks, Jason. And Gloria, you're next on my lineup screen.
Thank you, Deidre, and everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for bringing these conversations to the table. My name is Gloria Catt. I am the Executive Director of the Family Center, La Familia, here in Fort Collins. We are a bicultural and diverse family resource center that offers safe, nurturing, and affordable early childhood education from newborns to preschool age children. We are one of 31 centers in Colorado that offers comprehensive family support services. And also through the MIVOS program, we facilitate community engagement and leadership development to residents in our mobile home communities. I can say that 90% of the families that we serve belong to the Latinx community. As far as introduction, this is what I can say about us, and just waiting for the next questions.
Thanks, Gloria. I'm going to move to Casey. You're next to Gloria on my screen.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be a part of this panel. I'm Casey Hedrick with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Larimer County. Our organization specializes in out-of-school supports for young people, specifically between the ages of 5 to 18 years old. As this pandemic has hit us all, we all know that it certainly hit school-age children. And so our organization has shifted multiple times to help support remote learning, to help support evacuees from fires, and just to help support young people in any way that they can, and families throughout this entire year. And so again, just an honor to be here and excited for the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Casey. Queen.
Hi, my name is Queen, just Queen, leave the X, not Malcolm. So I am from Queen's Legacy Foundation in New Eyes Village. We are two local nonprofits here in Larimer County. We have a youth center called Youth Engaged in Arts and Academics, where we host families doing remote learning. We do small gatherings to keep our children together. What happened in the pandemic was a few of our families in our Black community had lost their jobs, and while they were looking for work, and the children were actually still doing remote learning in school, we have families that have parents out during the day and older siblings watching younger siblings, but still trying to do school at the same time. So we were able to lend supports through collaboration with CSU and a master's degree student who helps us educate our children over at the YEAR program as well. We do direct services for our families where we can transport them to the food pantries if they need to. We do a lot of mental health work in our community with our families. And actually, we have helped with some PPE supports as well, as we were able to get some things from Christina over at the Early Childhood Council. They supported our organization with stuff for our families. So yeah, that's about it. I'll have answers for any questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Queen. And Christina, and lastly, just maybe a high-level perspective on the impact of COVID on social emotional health of kids that you've seen, and what systems have responded to that.
Yeah, I'd say you guys know, I already introduced myself, so you know everything that we do. And yeah, to Deirdre's point, the pandemic has had an enormous impact on the social emotional health of kids. So kids being pulled from childcare centers meant they were losing their friends and their regular social contacts. Kids' remote schooling was keeping them away from their trusted adults and their social environments. And we've heard across the board over and over and over again that families are struggling. Incidentally, we worked really hard on a project with the school district and got responses on behalf of probably 3,000 families from the school district. And more than 65% of those families indicated that mental health and social emotional needs were very high on their list of priorities. So a very big impact of the pandemic, and something that we anticipate seeing throughout recovery and through the next 5 to 10 years in terms of how it impacts children's ability to focus in school and, you know, make friends and all of that. So lots of work to be done in that space as well. Thanks, Deirdre.
Great. So I think the first question is one that's relevant to all of you, and would love to hear your perspective with your sector hat on. With the loss of in-person school and childcare options that we've heard and mentioned, what did you see as community response from the business community, from the provider community? What were some of the things that you observed in your roles? And I'll just let any of you pop on rather than calling.
This is Anne, and I guess from an employer perspective, everything has accelerated. I think we were all struggling before pandemic with what's that balance between work from home, work in the office, where does family fit in a business environment or not fit in a business environment, and pandemic threw that all out the window and said family first, and let's see what we can get done together. At least that's what I saw from a lot of our employers. I know that was not consistent across the board, but I am very proud of many of our employers who said, yes, family first, and we'll figure it out. Lots of grace at the table in order to find that solution. I'm getting anxious that we're so far in that people are struggling, whether it's on the business side of a table or the family side of a table. Everybody is worn out, and we've got some systemic problems. We have to figure out a way to get people back into the spaces that make the most sense for their long-term success.
If I can speak really fast. So pre and post pandemic, as a provider here, so pre-pandemic, our community's concern has always been no representation of culture in the classrooms, with teachers, paraprofessionals, etc. Childcare in my community meant that the older siblings were watching the younger siblings. Like I said, there was no outsourcing after the pandemic hit. Our families were in need of space where all of their children could be in one place being looked after while they actually looked after their siblings. With some of the parents out of work, they were actually more than happy to volunteer at youths engaged in arts and academics to cook lunch and breakfast, clean up after projects, despite the glitter. I don't like glitter. With families having issues like food insecurity, overdue rents, transportation issue, families are stressed, and teachers don't have the training to deal with these issues. We were able to communicate when we came together at the center. We were able to communicate and dialogue with our children and youth, giving them understanding as to what's going on through our eyes, with like racism and the virus and things like that. Personally, as a grandparent raising grandchildren, I have 2 7-year-olds, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old that do online learning. So I'm a teacher. And I don't know, when you think about the mental health in our children, you have to think about the mental health in our parents as well, because we were working and then we weren't, and then we were teachers. So the transition was really quick. The work I do varies from community engagement and organizing to literally just running families around town to make sure that they're taken care of. So, yeah, a little bit of everything.
Thanks, Queen.
I'd say we've definitely seen a lot of shared ownership over the last year, and that's been really, really cool to see businesses recognize their role in childcare access, and to see governments, just the fact that Jason is here having this conversation with us. Jason, good job. Shows that some of our municipalities and governments are really focused on the right issues. So I would say that's a big one that I've seen over the last year, is just a lot of mobilization and a recognition that this is an issue that impacts everybody. It's not just moms, it's not just kids, it's employers, it's the economy, it's the grocery store, it's everything.
And I think, to your point, Christina, it's also government. I think government has to play a role in addressing the childcare issues that seem to be systemic and ubiquitous wherever you are in the country. And while governments might not have the resources to, create a childcare facility that has enough spaces for everyone who needs it, government can help communicate about the need, so that, in a place like Estes Park, where we have an older demographic, you can help people understand why it is an issue and how the quality of life that they have come to really enjoy could be jeopardized if some of these issues aren't addressed. And with an aging population, there are some people who think, well, I don't have kids, this isn't my problem. But if we don't have childcare for people who work in our local economy, then those people aren't going to be able to work in our local economy anymore. And I think the question that Deirdre asked was about pre and post pandemic, and I know in Estes Park the childcare issues are they've been characterized as a crisis locally, and they have been for years. And where we are right now is at this point of just complete uncertainty about how COVID will impact the number of childcare spaces locally. We have, strangely, open spaces right now, and usually there's long wait lists, and right now there's also seems to be more financial assistance for scholarships. So that's got several people scratching their heads, and I think one of the things that has happened is people are unable to work right now, and so they're at home and they can take care of their kids anyway. But that's not going to be, that's not going to be the case for, hopefully, for much longer. And so we're curious to see how things shake out post-COVID, and trying to work with our partnering organizations. Lauren Y, I didn't catch why she's Lauren Y earlier, but I'm going to call her that if that's okay. She said that partnerships are absolutely critical to success, and I think that's one of the strategies that the town has employed, is partnering with local organizations, whether they're childcare providers or nonprofits dedicated to providing support to childcare providers, or our local economic development corporation and chamber. Those partnerships are absolutely critical, not only in helping communicate about the issue, but helping our community work through the challenges that we're currently facing, given our kind of unique, I don't like using that word, but situation as a relatively isolated geographically community, where there are either options within Estes Park or there aren't, and people aren't going to drive an hour to Loveland or Longmont to drop off their kids, or Fort Collins, and then drive back to Estes Park to work. Just ain't gonna happen.
Jason, thank you so much for those thoughts. So as we know, single working mothers were the first ones that basically faced the uncertainty of not having childcare and not being able to preserve employment. And another group that was severely affected was our migrant Latinx workers, because they lack the access to welfare benefits and health information. So to me, the pandemic revealed the fragility of our social and health systems, but it also revealed that families constitute the most fundamental social unit in our community. And if families are not safe and supported, then our systems just collapse. So as a former parent of El Nidito and as a full-time working mother, I recognize the value of having an accessible, welcome, and well-structured childcare that provides the support that each family needs. So from food assistance, as Queen was saying, to social-emotional support, is just crucial to have those things in place. And then as an individual, I also value how much an organization cares for the community. And as you know, well, our center has always played multiple roles. We collaborate with key partners. We advocate for barrier-free and culturally appropriate services. And our educators and staff, they interact with families. And this is how we can detect what other supports are failing. And it is really interesting that we are using the word post-pandemic, because I prefer to see this crisis as a collective learning opportunity, but we need to approach this from a multi-level perspective. So we need to identify where those complex factors intersect instead of treating each factor as a separate element. To me, there's no perfect system. Well, we know that, but childcare is certainly not perfect, but it costs too much to keep it afloat, as Christina was saying.
A comment from a participant, and also was mentioned by panelists, the loss of school, the deaths, and like all of the things we've endured. What have we learned that you would like to see carried forward as we rebuild our community?
Sure, that's a big question. We've learned a ton, right? And I think a couple of things to start with. The first one is that we have an access problem. There's a problem with getting young people and families access to high quality childcare, to safe places. That's a problem. That was a problem before the pandemic, and that's a problem right now. And there's barriers that continue, that have started before the pandemic and have continued through the pandemic. And we're gonna have to come together as a collective to solve those barriers. That's transportation, that's affordability, that's having a cultural responsive or program. And we're gonna have to do that, and we're gonna have to do it quickly. I think the thing that we learned is that we create artificial barriers, and we have for years, around things that we don't think we can do. It will be great if we could be in Estes Park year round in 2025. This pandemic said, no, you have to be there now, and you have to figure it out now, and you can, because kids need it. And this is your wake up call. So our biggest takeaway has been, we're going to remove artificial barriers, and we're going to start to examine them and say, does this really exist, or is this in our head? And partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. The way that we're operating today, we would have never dreamed of operating like that a year ago. It wasn't even in our framework. And I hope that I can say that again in a year, because we want to keep on that innovative streak. And the only way we can do that is by working together.
If I can kind of piggyback off of Casey and Gloria a little bit. So I heard sister talking about at the family center, 90% Latin families, right? Casey, I heard you speak of high quality. So here I am, Northern Colorado, Fort Collins, a very small and vital Black community. And I've learned through this pandemic that we, our community, really like to engage one another. I'm sure it's the same over at the Family Center, where it's very cultural competent, as far as like maybe foods or different shows or clothes. When the pandemic hit and there were children that had to be removed from school, we were already dealing with SROs in our school. We were already dealing with not receiving what we thought was high quality childcare for our children in these white spaces. So when I was blessed with the space at Young People's Learning Center, and we developed Youth Engaged in Arts and Academics, the adults with gifts, with degrees, I didn't know there was a master's graduate right here in this city that was willing to volunteer their time at my center. I didn't know that Keenan had a bachelor's in social work. And these are the people that are inside of my center right now. And I just think before the pandemic, I didn't see them. They weren't in our schools. There was only SROs. So it led me to believe that we needed our own space. I seen how we started to heal, just like there's issues in everyone's community. The Black community has a lot of issues that we need to tend to and heal amongst one another for generations. And while we're dealing with this pandemic that started in March, we've been in a pandemic for 500 years. And I hate that, unfortunately, this virus is desensitizing us from Black Lives Matter. And I won't remove, what we're going through with this pandemic, but it heightened, like you said, a lot of things. It showed the systemic racism where we were at. It showed me how much my family and I were truly needed in this community. My son driving the bus around, making sure families get to the food market, people literally dropping off their children. Like one day it was like almost 11 kids there. And I was like, yeah, no, this is not what I do. So the fact that we need space of our own to deal with these issues, it just screams at me. And Casey, I would love to partner with you, with my organization, as we look at New Vision Charter School in Loveland for our center. And as you know, the Boys and Girls Club is right next to it. So
we're great neighbors, I promise.
Queen,
looking forward to it.
Casey already messaged me when we were starting and asked me if I'd introduce you to via email. So hold me accountable.
Indeed, Deirdre. Thank you so much. But that's my soapbox. Thank you, Gloria, and thank you, Casey.
Hi, I'm Raven. Just to kind of, I'm sorry, was someone else talking?
No, I just said thanks. Keep soaping.
Awesome. Just to kind of, I guess, just reiterate what Queen said with a different voice. Personally, I have been impacted by the pandemic, I guess as everyone has, but differently. I've been very fortunate, but it's a gift and a curse. I have not missed a day of work. Actually, I'm having longer hours. And then we elected to have our children to be in PSDV just because statistically the virus has impacted us, greater. We have a weird history with the government and new things rolling out and not knowing what's going where. Just felt more comfortable in a controlled environment where I could keep the kids at home and safe. Plus, my 7-year-old puts everything in his mouth. He has not grown out of that yet. So I didn't trust him not to compromise the entire household. I don't think that it's stressed enough, the work-life balance between having to still work and keep up the same load, not knowing federally what your rights are and how that protects your jobs, and feeling pressure of losing your job. I mean, the unemployment from the stories that I've heard is really, for a lot of people, not enough to sustain yourself like you were before. And like a lot of businesses are failing, it's really hard trying to get back to where you were pre-COVID. And if that wasn't the best situation, then Lord help you now. And so not federally knowing what your rights are, then the work-life balance of having to do work. There's an old expression where they want you to work like you don't have kids and raise your kids like you don't have to work. So now I am mommy, why I'm working 12 plus hours a day, and then I'm still trying to make sure there's enough of me mentally and emotionally available to them. My husband is great, but at the end of the day, it's always mom, 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 mom. So there's a lot of pressures, on me. I met Queen when we were still new. We've probably been about Colorado around 2 years, a little bit more. And, she made a point to come out, reach, and get to know and connect with me. But I'm not really familiar with any other organizations or what resources are available out here. My husband and I have had to work out childcare. And with the pandemic, since I'm concerned about my kids being in school, even if there are childcare options available, that's not really addressing my concern of the safety of them being, in an area, not knowing what those protocols are going to be, or how they're going to be enforced, or how they're going to be treated, or what's going on there. And then being children of color, we've had some interesting, to say, experiences here. Well, it's still much better than the South. I will let you guys know that hands down, but it's still really hard having to explain these conversations to my children. And this is another one where it's like, hey, this is impacting our people like this, so we decided to do this. And I'm going over with them, even down to the age of 7, with statistics and data to let them know that I'm not trying to be unfair, and this was a hard decision, and this is why I arrived at that decision. But it is tiring as a parent to have to keep having the conversation. Because we're Black, we're having to make this adjustment. And then in combination of that, with the lack of socialization, that's going on right now, I think that my children are feeling even more isolated and disconnected, from the community, from Colorado. They're constantly saying that they want to move back. And it's disheartening as a parent, because I know that Fort Collins and this area has so many more opportunities when we're moving from North Carolina. I mean, from the schools to everything, it's just a lot more. They could go a lot further here. And the fact that, these other issues are what's driving them to not excel here is hard. My daughter is 11. She normally tests in the top 95 percentile minimum for scores nationwide. And she has struggled to keep her grades up this year. So I know that it is really, really difficult for them, not being able to go into class, not having that unwind release that they need with their friends when they're walking from class to class or at lunch, or, recess PE, whatever, as well as having to learn new systems in addition to new material. And I know that the teachers, and we have been very fortunate with the teachers, but they have a curriculum and standards that they have to meet. And for the most part, they have been flexible. But as a parent, it is really hard to balance out work plus everything that they need to do with school.
Thanks,
I don't
Raven.
know.
I'm gonna pivot back. If you all don't mind, I just really quickly, I'm gonna pivot back to the panelists because I don't want to lose this train, and then we'll open it for comments and discussions in just a second. But I want to bring out Queen's point, Gloria's as well, and then Raven's perspective, and ask Anne and Jason to lean into from the business perspective about types of care. So I think Christina mentioned this in her opening around, we've had this pretty solid, or I don't know, rigid she didn't use that word, but we've had a real scripted, that's the word I'm looking for, version of what care has looked like in the past. What have we seen? I mean, you all have been mentioning it as panelists tonight. What have we seen about the need to diversify from an employer's perspective, from a parent's perspective, from our communities of color that want culturally attuned care? Talk a little bit more about that from each of your perspectives of what this delivery of care could and should look like that we've seen illuminated.
Sorry, I was waiting to see if Jason wanted to go first. I would suggest that as business advocates, we're still learning. When I think about the conversations that we were helping to drive or convene over the last couple of years with social perspectives and business perspectives at the same table, a lot of times I feel like business was saying, let's figure out what are these barriers, and are those rigid barriers required, or how do we blow them out of the way and make business more of a partner in the solution versus a blockade. So I've really appreciated the comments from our guests here today. And it makes me think we need to dig deeper, farther, faster in order to find interesting, new, creative ways to make sure we have safe spaces for kids and families to be, because again, if kids and families are safe, we can continue to have economic success and broader inclusion of people into our economic recovery. So I'm actually doing a lot of learning and listening today because we still have a lot to learn. We still have a lot to collaborate around.
Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot to add to what Anne just said. In Estes Park, everybody wants quality and affordable childcare. And in Estes Park, we want quality and affordable childcare, and we want childcare in general. We need, during normal times, more spaces. So I think something that can be done from a government perspective, but also as an employer or in partnership with our business community, is incentivizing or facilitating the creation of additional spaces through training or assistance with getting licensed, or things of that nature. Here in particular, there may be 0 spaces right now for kids age 0 to 2, for infants. And my wife and I have talked about it before. We have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And when we moved here from Washington, D.C., a year ago, frankly, we wouldn't have been able to do it. My wife, if our kids were just a little bit younger. Now that we're here, my wife works full time and we're done having kids, but it wouldn't be an option if I also wanted to work and live in Estes Park. So that is something actually that we're trying to do locally. and that's a challenge too. We hear people say, well, you know, it's too hard or expensive, or there are too many hurdles to getting a license. And we partner with a local organization, the Estes Valley Investment in Childhood Success, that are actually providing that program for free, facilitating, you know, licensure. And as far as I understand, they're having difficulty finding people to kind of sign up for that. When I was in my previous place where I worked, we had a very large Ethiopian population, and I was working with, started to work with that community before I left, and trying to create sort of a cooperative model where parents could kind of alternate days or weeks or whatever watching children, and that would give the other parents an opportunity to pursue education or work or things of that nature. And that model was really well regarded by that community, because they were able to keep some of the things culturally that were important to them as part of the child care, you know, to speak a little bit to what Queen was saying earlier. That's all I'll say for now.
And if I could just mention really fast, my events manager is on the call with us, and she keeps me up to par. She wanted me to mention, because she sees this happening with me. I am not savvy.
Yes, you are.
I try, Deirdre, I swear I do. But she did, she said, please mention that there's also an education gap that parents are having to confront as they help their children. Unfortunately, due to generational inequities in education, some parents don't have the knowledge base to help their children. And that was one of the things that I brought up from the beginning. Even at the board, the Early Childhood Council board meetings, I would just say that, you know, I learned differently. I taught my children, my first generation of children, they're 30, 28, and 24 tomorrow. And it's like the second generation, the 12 and the 10 and the 2 7-year-olds, it's really hard for me to engage them. And it frustrates us both, because they want mommy and grandma to sit and, you know, do these problems with them. But I look so inefficient to my children, you know? And then what do I have to do? And this is nothing against my sisters on the screen, but I then have to sit them in front of the screen with our white teachers and allow her to educate my child. A woman like me, you know, I'm looking for liberation. I'm looking for liberatory acts to start implementing into my family. So when I see that I have to not engage my 7-year-old son and grandson, but I have to go back to this white space where there's that knowledge that they need, I'm just like, you know, kind of like damned if I'm doing, damned if I don't. And that hurts. It does.
Thanks for sharing that, Queen. I'm like capturing ideas and thoughts, and hope I'll probably go back and rewatch this to make a summary of notes, because your perspective of how do our systems empower to help parents be the content experts that we need to be, so that we, in our way, shape and form and community can be that. Thanks for sharing that. It was really.
But here's the thing, Deirdre, I don't mean to cut you off. Who's to say that right now this generation wants to be teachers? You know, we have to find other educators. We have to find that other generation. We have to employ, you know, the unfortunate BIPOC community that our judicial system has had their knees in their necks for 20 and 30 years. Now we have to look at them and say, how do we incorporate you guys and you women into this educational system because it has to be done. It hurts because as much as we look for our older generation of men and women to come and teach and nurture, you know, they're fighting their own issues, whether it's, you know, being arrested because they're Black or being deported because they don't live, you know, they're not from here. Regardless of the situation, there's a huge discrepancy. And I love my children and grandchildren, but I don't want to sit on a computer with them for 6 hours out the day. That's not what I grew up to do.
Yeah.
It's time for me to live.
I want to make sure we have time for attendees to ask questions of all of the panelists, but I had a question that was really specific to something that a lot of you touched on already. And I wanted to just lead with the notion of how our communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Both our business owners, our families, our children. In Larimer County, our case rates for Latinx community members are twice that of what they are in our white non-Latinx community. We've seen the business, the lack of availability of resources and information for Spanish-speaking business owners and workers. Queen had mentioned losing 2 members of the Black community already here, and we know nationally the data are similar in terms of disparity. I've had individual conversations with every one of you on the panel about the work you're doing in this space to acknowledge and lean in to what we've learned, and would love just to hear, I think it would be great for everyone to hear you talk about what you're doing in this regard beyond anything you've already shared. And that'll wrap up my questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. So thanks for indulging me, but I think, and I think it's a really critical issue to address. So I'm gonna pick on Christina, because just to kick us off and then.
Yeah, goodness, what are we doing to lean in? We're not doing enough, I'll tell you that much. We're working really hard as an organization to just look introspectively at where we're at and how we are approaching equity work in our community. One big change that we're making, especially from what we've seen over the last year and a lot of the stuff that Queen has shared, is engaging the BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color community in decision-making and in program design. And so we've committed to contracting with individuals of color to consult on programs that we intend to implement, or on trainings that we intend to offer, or any work that we do that is intended to increase equity and increase the awareness of our community that the color of your skin still predicts your educational outcomes. And until that stops, then we haven't done our job. I think Queen has done a great job of really outlining why that is, why families of color don't graduate as often or have lower, test scores, and it's because they're in a system that's set up to fail them. And that starts all the way at early care and education, and we recognize that. So we're starting our steps, but I'll be the first to acknowledge that it's not enough.
I would echo what Christina said. For the town of Estes Park, we're getting the ball starting to roll. Wish it had happened decades ago, but I think we're getting some things in place so that we can do a better job of engaging certain demographics in our community. I want to highlight something that has worked out really well. So Larimer County is a participant in the Small Business Relief Program. That's a state program. And what Larimer County did this go round was hired what they called a cultural broker. And this is somebody who is proactively reaching out to, members of the business community who, may not be receiving information about this program because it's in English or for whatever reason. And you know, she has been it's been extraordinarily successful. You know, they're getting cell phone numbers of business owners where they can to make sure that they're making contact to ensure that they're aware of this program. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't, maybe they're not eligible, but that contact has been viewed in very high regard. And my thinking is, you know, why don't we do this for everything, especially as, you know, especially as government and municipalities where we know we know what our demographics are, and we know that more things should be put out and communicated in other languages and things like that. And Estes Park, we rely very heavily on people in our community with big hearts to assist with translation services or communicating about government services or other community amenities. And that's great. And those people are great. They should be they should be consultants. They should be getting paid a fair wage for that work that they're doing. And that's actually something I'm talking about with Deirdre and some representatives in Larimer County and hopefully some partners locally. You know, the town may or may not have the need for those services, you know, for a full-time position or something, but I know all of the organizations together have way more than, you know, a full-time job for that. So I think there's opportunities there for our organizations to, you know, develop a plan and partner to ensure that that service is readily available and that the people providing those services are being compensated for their work.
I can hop in here. So we're spending a lot of time listening and learning, and we have a lot of work to do. The other thing that we're looking at is our systems. What are our systems doing, and what should they be doing, and how are they inadvertently potentially leading to the furthering of oppression, and elevating youth voice and elevating the voice of our parents to help us design systems that are for them, that are accessible, and that are what they need. So that's kind of some of the work that we're doing in that area.
Can I go?
Please.
I think that we're all going to see the effects of the pandemic for many years. And I think from a social perspective, we can all engage in a permanent dialogue and make sure that we are providing the critical thinking and leadership skills to our young generations. Queen was talking about, like, if the kids are wanting to be teachers in this era, like, what does that mean? But we need to speak up and tell all these stories, you know, so we cannot abandon our communities of color and our essential migrant workers. We need to advocate for fair and safe labor conditions. We need to advocate for fair wages for our teachers. I think the best way to achieve engagement, joining the county boards, speaking to government officials, and in general, just raising awareness. I think that policymakers need to get to know our community and just be where the families are, you know, just not work from above and not see the reality. For our organization, trustworthy relationships are built through time. Just because an agency is providing language justice, that doesn't mean that they have established a relationship with the community. It's a big step. I recognize that it's huge, but we recognize that families come with many problems, but we also recognize that families are not the problem. So we work alongside with them to identify their strengths, you know, and provide them with the resources that they need so they can achieve their goals. And we all have always valued the power of self-determination of the families that we serve. I have seen families that have lived in Fort Collins for more than 20 years, and they have never, ever needed any type of assistance until the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing at the Family Center is that we are changing the narratives and engaging other partners in recognizing the value of our migrant Latinx families and communities of color. And just to wrap this up, one of our mothers felt embarrassed to say that she was cleaning houses for a living. And she did not have a supervisor that could extend proof of her income. So what we did, we encouraged her to change the narrative to say that she's an independent business owner and she's her own boss. So she regained her self-esteem at the same time that we remove a barrier to access rent assistance, something simple as just accessing rent assistance. Thank you.
That gave me the chills, Gloria. Thank you for sharing that example of a reframe. So I want to just also, I meant to ask the panelists to close us out with ways that the community can advocate. Some of you have woven this in already, but if there are things that you want to ask of the larger community who are here and motivated on this call about ways as employees to let their employers know of their childcare needs so we have good understanding, or anything you want to share and ask as a request for advocacy from sympathetic listeners here tonight.
I think we all need to continue communicating the importance of early childhood education and touting why it's important and what the outcomes can be if investments are made in it. I probably shouldn't say this because I don't have a source for it, but I recall reading that every dollar invested in early child care education yields something like $7 or $8 or something like that, generated an economic benefit. And that's probably attributable to the fact that if there are kids in childcare or school, their parents can be working, but also because the educational outcomes down the road are much better. So, you know, you have a more skilled workforce, or, you know, people who have developed skills to contribute more to the, you know, to the community economically.
I want to just plug real quick that what Jason said ties exactly into what we're doing with Larimer Thrive by 5. So the promotional materials exist, and y'all just need to sign on and spread the word.
I agree. More collaboration between organizations. And honestly, we have to think outside the box. We have to revamp what's been going on. I mean, I really can't say it no other way. Let's seriously just think outside of the box, put ourselves in our family's shoes, ask the right questions, and peer support. Mrs. Hutchison, well, Sister Ann, I'm gonna ask that you and I get together on a meeting, because I would really like to figure out how our community and the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce can do some work.
I would love that. Thank you, Queen. And I'll just say thank you all for sharing today. Powerful, powerful. I'm doing a lot of listening, a lot of note taking, and am very ready to bring business to the table, to be a co-creator and a collaborator in finding great solutions. So thank you.
I want to open it up and just so everybody here knows, the United Way of Larimer County will only be leaning in more in this area. You have heard from Women Give that we've had 15 years of experience with providing scholarships to single moms returning to school. We recently allocated almost $300,000 in CARES funds to a variety of providers and families across the community. And we're going to continue. So this issue touches on every one of our priority areas of financial stability, of youth and education, and really, you know, those upstream by investing in our youngest community members. As you all have said, we see leaps and bounds of growth for generations. So with that, I will open it up. I know I had cut somebody off who'd started to share to return to the panelists, and I want to make sure that they have an opportunity, and anyone else that wants to pop in, ask questions of our panelists or just share an experience or perspective, and then we'll let y'all out for the night. Madison will close us out.
Can you
Well,
hear
then
me?
this is definitely
go.
the best panel I've been on. I was going to say nobody asked questions. Yay!
I think we just have some shy people. So if you don't want to share your question by unmuting yourself, you can raise your hand, or you can also put your question in the chat. And it looks like Lisa Kutcher has raised her hand. So Lisa, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Thanks, Maddie. So I'm a big proponent of early childhood education. I think it should be universal, and it's not something I've ever been aware of as being universal. So I just wanted to ask Jason if he could share a little bit about his experience in DC. I think he mentioned at the beginning about was that just kind of like how K through 12 is universal, or how could we work on moving forward in that direction?
Yeah, I think DC, thanks for the question. I think DC is one of the, I guess, municipalities that has been very forward thinking. They're a laboratory for democracy and other things, evidently. And they just, it's part of the regular, it's not K through 12 there, it's pre-K 3 through 12. So as soon as you turn 3, you're eligible for pre-K 3. And in fact, I think you can be late too, actually. It depends on when your birthday is. And it is all day school with a curriculum for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. When my youngest was 3 years old, he was in a classroom with 15 other kids, and there were 2 instructors in there and a third kind of assistant, and that was just the norm. And it was exceptional. They had a rigorous curriculum for 3 and 4-year-olds, as rigorous as it can be for a 3 and a 4-year-old. But my oldest was reading when he was 4 years old, and it was largely attributable to the education that he got in public school when he was 3 and 4 years old. It costs a lot of money, obviously, but it's one of those trade-offs that I think taxpayers were okay with making. And it's a little different in municipalities in Colorado where, man, it was a whole 180 in my thinking, because where I came from on the East Coast, everything was paid for through property taxes, and that is not the case out here. And you have to have the voters vote before you can increase or levy a new tax here. And I think that's been one of the challenges in Estes Park, because our population is mostly people without kids.
Well, and Lisa, just Proposition EE that Colorado voters approved last year will include universal preschool, but not to the extent of all day. And so that's something, as we as a local community want to design something that's favorable to working families, because there's not a lot of working parents who feel like a 2.5 hour of preschool a day is going to address their need to be at work. So that's, I think, as a community, what we could look at to the out of the box perspective we've talked about tonight is, how do we do that? How do we supplement what the state will provide with culturally attuned all day, extending it, to Casey's point, to older kids who need that care outside of school hours.
And there was also aftercare. When I say all day, I don't mean until 5 o'clock, but there was aftercare that went until 6. And some months they didn't have grant funding, I guess, and it was $80 a month, which is, very affordable for, the extra 3 hours a day or whatever. But I think most of the months that we were there, it was subsidized and we didn't pay for it. And it didn't matter what your income was or anything like that. It was just taken care of. And I think that was largely due to equity issues.
Especially we have a long way to go in that space.
I've been very happy to be in Estes Park and not DC this last year, though. So
Yeah, that's fair. There's a question in the chat about what cities and municipalities can do to help, and I was just going to tag on to that. When it comes to access to early care and education, there's often a lot of regulations in place that cities and municipalities have some control over, whether it's fire marshal standards or whether it's zoning or considering a family child care business versus a residential entity. So I encourage whoever asked that question to dig in there. There's some legislation happening at the state level that will support reclassifying family providers as residential businesses rather than, you know, full businesses to help alleviate the barriers. But there's work that can be done at the local level to do that as well.
I see a comment in the chat about making sure we prioritize infants and toddlers because when we heavily invest in pre-K, and I think that's something that people who have done preschool only initiatives have pointed out as lessons learned. And so again, we have that opportunity to think really creatively with CCAP, our subsidized funding, and from the county and the state, and yeah. Somebody asked the question, where can we find details on where and how Prop EE money is being spent? I'm trying to follow the chat here. It's still early in the process, but the funds will go towards filling gaps in other areas. If anybody else wants to chime in.
I would say, Leah, you can look on the Colorado Children's Campaign website. They do a really good job of outlining what's going on in that process, and they're leading the policy development work. But the first couple of years of funding for Prop EE will go to filling gaps in other areas, not universal pre-K. Universal pre-K won't start until 2023.
Other questions for the panelists? Any last thoughts from any of the panelists?
I would share, I think it's really important, the racial equity lens that emerged in this conversation and the fact that it was illuminated by so many. And I would encourage those in the room that felt undereducated in the area or like they didn't really understand to keep digging and to keep learning more about it and talk to those around you about it. I can't highlight enough the fact that if we look at educational attainment data for our county, that the color of your skin continues to predict your outcomes. So there's a lot of issues in this community that we tend to bury. We like to call Fort Collins and Larimer County as the, you know, the rosy places that we all want to live, but it's not rosy for everybody. And it's important that we continue to elevate that as an issue. So just really want to thank everyone that brought it up. And also encourage the rest of you to keep having these conversations, the hard conversations that you need to have with your colleagues and your family and your friends, because that's the only way we get to a place of change.
Thanks, Christina. I feel like that's a really great wrap up and charge more than anything else for us. So appreciate it. Maddie, do you want to close us out? And thanks again, everyone. We so appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for staying on with us and hanging in there for over an hour. Really appreciate the candid sharing of our panelists and also sharing your stories. There is a lot to learn and a lot of work that we have to do. I will be sending out a follow-up communication to everyone that registered. And if you're on right now and you did not register, please send me your email in a private chat so that I can add you to that list, but it'll include all of the resources that were shared in the chat. And then there are a few other opportunities for engagement coming up in the next few weeks. There is, and maybe, let's see, Gloria could share a little bit about the video that is Betty Aragon and a couple of other people in that community have, yeah, Gloria, can you speak about that shortly? And we'll send a link to that in the follow-up communication.
Yeah, so Betty Aragon, one of our community leaders here in Fort Collins, she has always advocated for, you know, for the Latinx community of color here well, not only for Collins, the whole Larimer County area. And she recently created a documentary that addresses how COVID has impacted our communities. So that they're gonna be screening that this Sunday. So Maddie, do you want me to share the link with you and then you will send it? But are you gonna be able to send it by Sunday so people can register?
Yeah, my hope is to send out the recording and all of these resources by the end of day tomorrow, so that people can register and tune in on Sunday. Unless you have the link handy and you can pop it in the chat, or we'll wait until you can find it, and then we'll put it in the chat if people don't want to wait for that follow-up communication.
Yeah.
A couple of other things, we do have the Women Give Luncheon coming up 2 weeks from today. This is our biggest event of the year, and also our opportunity to highlight and celebrate the dedication and perseverance of our Women Give Scholarship recipients. We're really excited. It's our first ever online luncheon, and we hope everyone will tune in if you would like to see it live on February 11th at 11 a.m. And that event link will be, oh, you know what? I copied it earlier. So I will share that in the chat right now. And then we'll also include advocacy trainings that the Women's Foundation is putting on. Those will be happening monthly. And then a couple of things that we heard as actionable steps, which is something we've promised you that there would be at the end of this. There is a lot of learning to do. So I would say some of the things that we've heard is to get involved in your local communities. Pay attention to what's happening at city council meetings, what's on the discussions and on the agendas. There is a lot that happens at those meetings that impact all of us in the community, and others much more significantly than others. So getting involved in your local policy and advocacy efforts, and at the state level. The advocacy trainings that the Women's Foundation puts on are for all skill levels. And so if you're wanting to learn as a new person to advocacy and policy, it's a great place to learn how you can access local and state level legislators, as well as providing skills for how you do that, if it's writing a letter or making a phone call or showing up and testifying. So there are really great ways to be involved in policy and advocacy at every comfort level. You don't have to show up and give a big presentation. However, you can share your story, but you can also write a letter. You can also write an email. So just want to encourage everyone, there is a place for everyone in the policy and advocacy space. There's a place for everyone to be involved at every comfort level. And as we've shared too, we've got to do this together, and really, really excited at the people that were on this call with us today, and just really want to encourage all of us to continue reaching out to other people that are also decision makers, that are also, that we should all be at that same table. And so, as Deirdre said, we'll be continuing to lean into this work, and I will send out that email with the resources after tonight. I'll send that out tomorrow. And it looks like Allison shared again the link about advocacy trainings, and then Gloria shared the documentary filming or documentary screening information as well. And again, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists and to our presenters, to Deirdre, to United Way, to Women Give, and to all the staff and volunteers and community members that spent your Thursday evening with us. And
Madison, if
sometimes-
you don't mind,
Yes.
before we go, I just really need to say thank you for my families that showed up here tonight. I sent them out that email. I already knew Raven was going to say something. Thank you, sister. Aisha, I am really grateful for the Cultural Enrichment Center showing up here tonight. They are another Black nonprofit here in Larimer County that is looking to raise up our young men as best as we can. Jamal does a lot of great work over there, and I'm looking forward to doing some type of collaboration with him, especially with the upcoming Black History Month. And Mrs. Lauren, I just want to say that Deirdre, Christina, like these women, I know these women. And it's definitely been a pleasure growing in community with them. Claire, always had an amazing relationship with Claire Bouchard for the past couple of years. And I have to say, when I say sister, friend, and sisters and support, our support don't always look like us. So for these women to think outside of the box and come outside of themselves and think about different tactics of power sharing in order for women like me to be successful, I just feel like sometimes that needs to be named. I appreciate you for that, always supporting me, and I'm sure you will continue to support me. And thank you, Michelle, my beautiful sister in Christ. I pray with her all the time. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. And thank you, Nina and Jamal, for being here, my board members.
Okay, I think that will wrap us up for the evening. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Have a great night.
Good night,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Good night.